a canvas yet. So if I go to File, New, and say OK, we now have a canvas. And the last thing is the Layers palette. So I see that it says Layers right here, so I can click this. If you can't find where it says Layers right there, just go into Window, Layers, and then it will pop up just like that. Now, if you're having trouble finding just about anything, all you need to do is go into Window, and if you know the name of it, it's probably going to be listed right here. Now, something else that you'll note is there's a little arrow icon right here. If I click it, things expand a little bit more, and if I double-click this or double-click this, it just allows me to play with the interface a little bit. So I'm just kind of double-clicking these tabs. I can hit this arrow, I can click this, and it's different ways to interact with the interface. For now, I'm going to keep the interface like this, or in fact, let's simplify it a little bit more. So I'm going to drag out this Layers tab. You can see how it drags into a floating window. And I am going to close this, and in fact, I'm going to drag this out right here. I'm going to hit X. See how it has an X right there? Just to get rid of them. So now, literally, the only things we have, here, let's drag this back to the side. The only things we have is we have the tools, we have the Layers palette, and we have the canvas right here. And that's all I want you to worry about. And again, if you don't know where the Layers palette is, just go into Window, click on Layers, and you're good. All right, now we're all on the same page. Now, in order to use Photoshop, you need to be aware of it's not just a matter of clicking things with the mouse, it's also using the keyboard. It is a two-handed operation, and in order to make things go as quickly as possible, I want to introduce you to the very fundamental keystrokes. Now, I'm going to be giving you a lot of shortcut keys over the course of the next 4 hours or however long this ends up being. The keystrokes that I'm giving you, the shortcut keys that I'm giving you in this video are the ones that you absolutely need to know. All the other ones are icing, but these are the ones that you'll be using like every single minute of using Photoshop. So before I do that, let's add in an image just to make this a little bit more interesting. So I'm just going to add in a sand dune right here, press enter, so there we go. All right, so let me show you the various shortcuts. The first shortcut that I want you to know is Control minus. If I hit Control and then minus, we're able to zoom out. All right, quickie 2018 time out. Throughout this course, I use the phrase control, and I just want to be clear, if you're on a PC, that's what it is. It's control plus whatever you're using. If you're on a Mac, which I feel like most people are in this day and age, when I say control, I mean command. There's two keys that are down there. Here, let me show you an old-timey keyboard. I bet this is overkill, but, you know, why not? Old-timey keyboard. I want you to be using this, this key whenever I say control, and this thing that actually says control on it, just never use that. That's a thing you never use. So whenever I say control, if you're on a Mac, I actually mean this key. Okay, we're good? Great, let's keep going. Zoom out is Control minus. You'll notice that I have it showing up on the screen right here. That's just a little program I have to make it easier for you. Control plus allows us to zoom in. So there we go, zooming out and zooming in. Spacebar, if you click and hold down the spacebar, you can pan around the image. Got it? Hold down spacebar, click, and pan. If you hit Control 0, you can have the canvas fit to your screen. So if I zoom out a bunch, and then I hit Control 0, it all fits to my screen. Same if I zoom in, I pan around a bunch, Control 0, fits to my screen. Let's say that I move this a little bit around and I decide, oh, I want it in the center. Control Z undoes that action. So Control Z undoes and redoes. In Photoshop CC, actually Control Z works a little bit differently. If you do a series of commands and then you hit Control Z, 1, 2, 3, 4, it actually undoes every action that you do. So in older versions of Photoshop, it will undo and redo, but in Photoshop CC, every time you hit Control Z, it works the same way that you'd expect it to work in Excel or Word or whatever other program you're using. And then to redo that action, you can actually hit Control Shift Z. Let's get back to other shortcuts. And in fact, let me give you a few shortcut keys that you probably already know, but are good to know just in case. Control A selects all. Control C copies. Control V pastes. So you'll notice we have two of this image right now. So if I were to press Control A and then Control X cuts, and then Control V still pastes. So we have Control C for cut, Control C for copy, Control V for paste, Control A for select all, and Control X to cut. So if you want to see all of those listed right here, all you need to do is go into Edit, and you can see paste, copy, cut. Now I imagine, and undo, I imagine a lot of you, if you've been using Word or any programs like that, already know those few shortcut keys. And those shortcut keys right there, just those 7 or 8 I just told you, those are the majority of shortcut keys you'll be using in Photoshop. So learn them. Control plus, Control minus, Control 0, space bar to pan around, Control Z to undo, Control A to select all, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and Control X to cut. Let me throw you one more shortcut, and then we'll move on to actually creating something in Photoshop. So the last one that I want to show you is the shortcut key F. Not Control F, not Alt F, just pressing the button F. If you press it, you change your screen mode. And what I mean by that is you go from it looking like this to, if you hit F twice, to it looking like this. Now I tell you this for 2 reasons. One, if all of a sudden you're looking at your screen and you have no idea what you just did because your screen is looking like that, where are my windows, where is everything? It's probably because you accidentally hit F. So that just changes your screen mode right there. The other reason I tell you it is because I really like using the button F. So I'm going to tell you that right from the start. One more shortcut key, Tab. If you accidentally hit Tab, or if you purposefully hit Tab, it gets rid of all of your palettes, all of your tools. So if all of a sudden your tools and your palettes disappear, it's probably because you hit Tab. So those are the major shortcut keys that you want to know just right off the bat. Let's actually start creating an image. So let's say I wanted to create a business card. First thing that I'd do is I'd go into File, New, and create a new document. 3 by 2.5 inches in the size. Actually, let's go to US paper and set this at 3 by 2.5 inches, and we're going to ignore all of this stuff down here and press OK. Just want to call out that in 2018, the interface looks a little bit different, but I think you're able to map on that old interface to this new interface without completely losing your mind. Oh, the print thing's up here. It's totally different. What am I going to do? All right, let's get back to it. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some text. So I'm just going to click right here, and I'm going to say, I don't know, Sandy Dune, and let's say Sand Dune Salesman, and then say 1, 2, 3, 4 Street Lane, a very specific place, and give him the phone number of that. There we go. Fantastic. In order to commit these changes, I'm going to go back to the Move tool. So you'll notice that what I did is I went to the Text tool in order to create some type. Here's a quote about sand dunes. So I did that in order to create the type, and then I went to the Move tool in order to move it around. And if I had added some type, and blah, 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 and then I tried to move it just right here, I'm not able to, because I need to be on the Move tool in order to move stuff around. And in that same way, if I tried to edit this text, so I'm double-clicking this right here, but I was on the Move tool, I'm not going to be able to do anything. I need to be on the Text tool in order to edit the text. So there we go. Sometimes people will accidentally be in the Text tool, try to edit it, and instead they select outside of the text. So that's not helpful at all. If you accidentally do this, you can just click that text and hit delete. Make sure that, look at the cursor, make sure that it's changed from this to this. And then that's telling you that you're able to change that text. So let's actually make this a little bit more interesting. I'm going to go up here. Now, whenever we go to a different tool, this part, which is called the Options bar, changes. If we're on Text, it becomes Text Options. If we're on the Move tool, it becomes Move Tool Options. We want Text Options. I'm going to double-click this, select it, and let's make it bold. So there we go. We're going to make it a little bit bold. And let's decrease the size of this right here. And in fact, I want to actually decrease the amount of line spacing between this. And I'm looking at it, and there is no option to do that right here. So if you don't see any options at the option bar, there's a couple of places that you want to look. One, try right-clicking. Sometimes that gives you something. In this case, nah, that doesn't do anything at all. The next place to look is there a window specifically made for that tool? In this case, there is. For text, it's called the character window. So if either you can go to Window, Character, or there's actually a button inside of the options bar right here. So I'm just going to click on it, and you can see, I went to move this and it disappeared. So I'm going to go to Window, Character, or I'm just going to click right here. It pops right back up. So what's happening? Why do we have all of this junk right here? And when I move it, why does it disappear? The reason for that is we have a lot of windows, a lot of palettes that have been anchored together. And if I click this button, it looks like an A, it stands for character. We can have it pop out. If I click this button, we can have it disappear again. If I move this to here, it goes away from all of the others. I can click X, and now it's on its own. So if I click this, it's on its own, or even better, if I just double click up here, it goes like that. Or even better, if I just move it up here, I can dock it onto the side. So you can see you can play around with palettes. They're not that confusing. Now in this palette, there's a lot more options than what we found inside of the options bar. There's things like this button down here, which allows me to do faux italics. Apparently it was already on faux italics. I want to decrease the size of line spacing. So up here is the ability to decrease the size of line spacing. I just hover my mouse above this. You'll notice the cursor changes, and I can make it less, or I can make it more, or I can do the opposite. So we're going to make it a little bit less like that. I'm going to increase the letter spacing, decrease the letter spacing. There's other things you can do here. I want to make the letters wider. I want to make them longer. Don't use these. In general, nobody uses these two things right here. If I set them back to 100, they're set back to standard. Just to show you, to take you through this, let's say I wanted to have, let's say, third. Let's say I wanted to do that. I could decrease the size of this font just by selecting it, and then I could increase it, move it higher up by just using this thing right here, baseline shift. Or another way that I could accomplish that, here, let's delete that right there, go to Dune, third. Another way I could do that is just by selecting that and going into subscript or superscript. Here's subscript, here's superscript. Play around with these windows. They're not all that confusing. Things like small caps, full caps, all of that are various options that you're able to do right there. I feel that's enough for text. You can basically figure out how to do it from there. Let's move on to adding images inside of this canvas. Let's add an image to this currently very lackluster business card. In order to do that, we go into the Finder, we click, we drag, and it's added to the business card right there. So I'm just going to kind of move it over to the side like this, and we can do whatever we want with it. So let's say I wanted to move it up here, I could. Now one thing to keep in mind is in order to move this image around, I need to be using the Move tool. If I am on any other tool and I click and drag, it's not going to work. So make sure you're on the Move tool in order to move it around. Now I want to make this a little bit smaller, and in order to do that we need to use the Transform tool, which is actually not a tool at all. It is going into Edit and clicking on Free Transform. Now pay attention to this right here. Over here it says Control T, which is to say if I were to hit Control T, I could get the same thing to happen. I don't want to overload you with more shortcut keys, so we're just going to go into Edit, Free Transform. When I do that, a box appears around this image, and I can click on a corner. Notice how the cursor changes when I go to the corner. I can click on the corner, and I can decrease it in size. Now, we run into a bit of a problem right here. And that problem is it is changing in size, but it is also disgustingly misshaping itself. So I am going to undo that just by hitting Escape and try it again. I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Free Transform, and hold it. Only this time, instead of just holding it, I'm going to press Shift while holding it. And that constrains the proportions. Now, the reason that we need to hold down Shift is in order to constrain the proportions. If you press different shifter keys, so Shift, Alt, Control, on just about any tool, they're going to adjust the options of what you're able to do. So for instance, on this tool, if you were to try pressing Alt, or if you were to try pressing Control, there's all sorts of other things that you could do. Now in this case, we don't want any of this, so I'm just going to press Escape. A lot of times, because like what Shift does and what Control does and what Alt does change from tool to tool, a lot of times because there's so many different options, people get a little bit confused. And what I'm telling you is, if you try to constrain the proportions and instead you get this happening, don't worry about it. Just hit Control Z to undo and try a different tool. Try a different key. So if you pressed Alt instead of Shift, no worries, just hit Control Z to undo it. And then if Control didn't work and Alt didn't work, hit Shift and that will work. So really all you need to remember is that there are modifier keys that affect each of the tools. You don't need to memorize Control does this, Shift does this, Alt does this. Just remember that there is a key that allows me to do this, and try one. If it doesn't work, just press Control Z and try the next one. You don't need to memorize all of this at once. Slight change in Photoshop 2018. Even without holding Shift, it constrains the proportions, and actually Shift does the opposite, and it causes you to do all of this. The point of this video is just to say that all of the different modifier keys do different things, and if you click them, weird stuff happens. But fortunately, moving your image by default isn't going to ruin it if you hit Free Transform in 2018. But please do play around with all of those great modifier keys. So this looks pretty good to me. I'm going to press OK. And that looks great. And that's how to add an image. So if I click and drag on this text, now you'll notice that I'm trying to click and drag on this text, but it's not working. Why is that? Oh, I'm clicking and dragging up here, but instead of it clicking and dragging this text, it's still clicking and dragging this layer, which isn't really helpful for me. The reason it's doing that is up here, I'm on the Move tool. In the options bar, the Auto Select checkbox is unchecked. I did this when the video wasn't recording, just to show you that this is a problem that you might run into. If you're trying to click and drag something and instead something else completely in the image is getting dragged, it probably means that this checkbox hasn't been checked. Make sure that you have this checkbox checked almost at all times right there. By default, it's left unchecked. That's a stupid thing that Adobe does. I don't know why. So I'm going to check this box right here, and now it auto-selects the layer that the pointer is above. So now when I click and drag, whatever it's above drags. Pay attention to the layers palette when I do this. If I click and drag this, it jumps to that layer, and then it drags this. When I click and drag this, it jumps to that layer and allows me to drag.
If it were easy to make money in the stock market, everybody'd be doing it. They're not rich, and you know there's a reason why. I'm telling you, the stock market has changed my life, and I've learned some.
Drag it. So let's say I wanted to put this sand dune image in the background of the canvas and have it so, well here, let's just do that right here. I'm going to say Edit, Free Transform, increase the size of this right here. Remember to hold down Shift so we don't get this happening, which nobody wants to be happening right there. And obviously I want all of the text to be showing up in front of it. Unfortunately, for some reason, this is covering up the Sandy Dunes guy, all of his name information, which isn't very helpful. So what's happening? I told you that there's only 3 windows that we need to worry about: the canvas, the tools, and the layers. So this is where layers comes in right here. Every object is treated as its own layer. So if I were to say select all, Control A, copy, Control C, and then paste, Control V, notice that another layer appears. Here, let me paste that in again. Pay attention to the layers palette. Control V, a new layer appears. So notice that a new layer appears. This is what allows me to drag these differently. If it's on a different layer, I can treat it as its own individual object. Each individual object is on its own layer. Or to rephrase that, each individual layer is its own object. So I'm just going to hit delete to get rid of that layer and that object. I'm going to move this up. Now, if I want this to be behind all of the text, all I need to do is I need to drag this layer and move it behind all of the text. Now it's a little hard to see this text right here, so what I can also do is up here, I can decrease the opacity of this layer, which is exactly what I want to do in this case. Let's say I wanted to add another image. So I'm going to go here, and let's add a little bit of a lake. Looks good. I'm going to decrease the size of it. Fantastic. Wonderful. Hit OK. You'll notice what happened is this lake got set up as its own layer. If I had another lake, here, let's add in another lake. When I drag this in, this is yet another layer. And if I wanted this lake to be behind this lake, all I need to do is drag it down here. Starting to get it? If I click up here, it jumps to this layer. If I wanted to delete this, I would hit delete. if I wanted this to be behind this text right here, in fact, let's change the color of that. And let me just select all of it, go to color, make it red just so it's easier to see, press OK. Here's a quote about sand dunes. If I wanted to make this go behind the image, let's say I put it up here. I'm going to use my arrow keys to nudge it a little bit. If I were to move it down here, it would go behind the image. So the layer stacking order determines the order that you see them in the stack. The furthest at the bottom means it's the furthest at the bottom. Like the lower it is, the further it is behind. It's as if one is on top of the other on top of the other. I think that makes sense. I'm pretty happy with that explanation. There's a couple of other things I wanted to show you about layers, and then we'll get into a bit more confusing stuff. There's a little eye icon right here. You can click it on and off in order to see it and not see it. So if I just click this on and off, it just turns it on and off. If you want to completely get rid of a layer, all you need to do is drag it to the trash can down here. So you'll notice there's a few icons down here. They allow you to do all sorts of stuff. Let me grab this image. You'll notice when I click on it, it immediately makes it so this is the layer that's selected. If I were to drag it down here, it would delete it. Let's undo that. If I were to drag it down here to the icon next to it, it duplicates it. So you'll notice that now in the layer palette, we have two versions of this layer. Now, you're probably noticing that you only see one version of the layer. The reason for that is one object is directly on top of the other one. So if I move it, now we're able to see both of them. Starting to get it? Excellent. I could shift select it, so multiple layers are selected. So now we have multiple layers selected. I'm going to drag them both at the same time. And now we have 4 layers, which we don't see. But if I drag this up here, now we can see 4. If I wanted to select multiple ones, I could just shift select them like this, duplicate it, and now we have 8 layers. Understand? So let's say I wanted to organize these a little bit. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to decrease them in size a little bit so we can play with them a bit more. I'm going to go into Free Transform, and you'll notice that if I have multiple layers selected, it actually allows me to decrease the size or change, all sorts of layers at once. We're not going to do that. I'm just going to keep it like this for now. Going to press Enter. We'll do fancy things like that later. Now, if I were to try and just select one of these, I'm not able to because all of them are selected. That's pretty easy to solve. I'm just going to click outside of it. Notice the Layers panel when I do this. And now I selected the sand dune, and now when I click back on this, only this one is selected. So let's organize them so they're in a bit of a grid. Here we go. Looking a lot more grid-like right there. I'll actually want to get 9 of them. So in order to duplicate this, I'm going to drag this down here and duplicate it right there. But I want this to be a perfect grid. It's not really working. So I want to select, first thing I want to do is let's turn off these bottom 6. So I'm going to turn these off. Oops, did that wrong. I'm going to turn this one off, 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 and there we go. So now we only have 3. Let's drag this down here, and this down here. In order to line them up, I would select all of them. Now I could try doing that by holding Control and selecting all of them in the Layers palette. But that's not all that intuitive. I like looking at the Layers palette as little as possible. The other way to select these 3 layers is by clicking on one, holding down Shift, and then clicking on the next one, keeping Shift held down, and then clicking on the next one still. And you'll notice that when I click on them, they get selected in the Layers palette. So again, all I did was I clicked it, I hit Shift, I held down Shift, and I clicked, and now all 3 layers are selected. Up here in the options bar, and this is if you're on the Move tool, which you are, there's a lot of options for keeping things organized. This one, for instance, makes it so the top part of them, the top edge, is all along the same lines. This one would make it so the center is on the same lines. This one would make it so they're all on the left side, which isn't what we want. This one right here distributes it evenly. So this just makes it so there's an even spacing between all 3. I'm going to drag these up right here, and I'm going to turn on all of the layers in order to get them organized. So let's click this, and let's click this, and let's actually nudge this up a little bit just by using the arrow, and I'm going to nudge this up a little bit as well, and move it like this. And let's actually move this one here. I'm going to click this, hold down Shift, click this, and Shift this, and make sure that all of them are aligned on the left edge. So I'll click this, and they're all aligned on the left edge. And then in order to distribute them evenly, I'm going to click this, and that distributes them evenly horizontally. So let's do the same for these as well. So I'm going to grab this, I'm going to grab this, I'm going to hold down Shift, click this, and make sure that all of their bottom edges are organized. Great. I'm going to press this, and then I'm going to Shift select this, make sure that their right edge is organized. Wonderful. I'm going to click this, hold down Shift, click this and this, distribute them evenly. Oops, that's not what I wanted at all. So I'm going to undo that, and clearly I had a problem. So I'm going to deselect, hold down this, and let's try that one more time. And that worked right there. It looked like what I pressed was some button that I didn't want to press. I don't know what I did wrong, and quite frankly, I'm not going to worry about it. All I did was I undid what I had done wrong, and then I just did it a way that I understood. If you're ever running into a case where you don't understand why this happened how it did, just press undo, click outside, and then start over. It's easier than trying to problem solve what just happened right there. So I'm just going to hit this, and this. Distribute this evenly. It's still not quite there, so I'm going to hold this, and this, and now these are all distributed evenly. This looks pretty good, although I do have to say I want to move this in a little bit. Excuse me, that's a little bit too much. So if I press undo, for some reason I'm not able to undo it. I'm hitting undo right now and nothing is happening. So I'm trying to press undo in order to get it to a wonderfully organized state, but unfortunately when I press Control Z, it looks like I've done something, it's not working. Notably in 2018 CC, you can hit multiple undos, and it will actually cause multiple things to happen, but still good to know about this panel that we're about to talk about here. If you want to go back multiple times, go into Window, History. So I'm going to click this right here, and I'm going to undock this from this mess of palettes right there. Let's just undock it right there, get rid of this, and bring my history panel up here. So I'm just going to dock it right there, and what I can do now is I can step back in my history, which is fantastic. So I can step backwards and forwards in my history, and that allows me to do multiple undos. I'm going to go right there, and now I've stepped back in my history. I'm going to be honest, a business card with 9 pictures of a rowboat on it doesn't look particularly good to me, so I'm just going to select all of these images right here, move them to the trash can, increase the size of this one image right here, and I want to show you one problem that you might run into. You'll notice that instead of going to Edit Free Transform, that got annoying. Instead, I am just hitting Control T in order to decrease the size of it. Now, if I were to decrease the size to this, and let's zoom in on that right there, Control plus to zoom in, spacebar, you'll notice that it doesn't have a lot of pixel information. But if I hit Control T and I increase it like this, all of that information that we lost is back in there. So I'm going to decrease the size again. Now, what you might see happen is you decrease the size, and when you increase it, it gets blurry. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to drag this lake in. Let's just open it up in Photoshop. Open it up in Photoshop. I'm not going to worry about that warning. You'll notice that instead of it opening up here, because I dragged it to the, the palette down there, whatever these are called, it opened up in its own tab. In order to move it from one tab to another, I'm just going to drag this out, and I'm going to click and drag it over here. Yes, I want to proceed. Let's undo that and actually go back to this window. Let's say you have it up here. The other way to do it is just to click and drag it, go to that tab, and that's another way to do it right there. But I find that a little bit more confusing, so either way works. Let's close this tab right here. Now, if I decrease the size of this image, Control T to transform, decrease the size of this right here, and let's zoom in right here, and we can see that we don't have a lot of pixel information, and now I increase the size of it, Control T, and then increase it right there. You'll notice that instead of increasing it and getting it all that information back, we've lost all that information. It was using this tiny bit of information right here in order to tell us what the big version is, which isn't particularly helpful. So why, with this one, are we able to decrease it to a teeny tiny image and then increase it and get everything back? Whereas with this one, we're not able to do that. When we try increasing it, it ends up looking like, well, crap. Here's the reason. The way that we brought this one in and the way that we brought this one into the image make them two very different layers. Now, look at the layer palette right here. One of them has this tiny little icon on it, which is telling us it's a smart object, and the other one doesn't. Now, I'm not going to get into all the differences of what a smart object is and what a smart object isn't, but all you need to know right now is a smart object you can increase and decrease in size and never lose quality, whereas a normal layer or a dumb object, let's just call them a normal layer, doesn't have that ability. If you decrease it in size, you can never get that pixel information back. So I am going to undo a few times until we have two viable layers. There we go. There's one. There's the other. And show you a couple of other things that are different with a smart object and a normal object. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to turn off this one and have it so we just have a normal layer right here. Now, I haven't shown you this yet, but what it is it's the Make a Square tool. It does more than that, but for now, let's call it the Make a Square tool. If I click and drag, I can select a part of an image, and then if I go to the Move tool, I can move whatever is inside of this square to another place that I want. Or let me do undo. I can copy it, I can paste it, and now it creates a new layer of just what's inside of that square right there. So the Make a Square tool is very nice in that way. If I were to go to, here we go, if I were to go to our Smart Object layer and do that same thing, so let's create a square and then use my Move tool and then try to drag it, I'm not able to do it. So this right here is a disadvantage to a Smart Object layer. You can decrease and increase it in size, but you're not able to do things such as really edit the image around. So for instance, let's take my dumb layer again, just a normal layer. If I were to take this entire bottom half and move it so half of it's on the top, half of it's at the bottom, and then move my text and put it in the middle, I can do that with a normal layer. But with the Smart Object layer, I'm not able to split it in half like that, at least not in any simple way. So that's the difference between a layer that's a Smart Object and a normal layer. All right, so the question that I'm sure you have right now, don't worry about how I'm doing multiple undos at once. It just speeds things up for demonstration. Let's not bog you down with information that you shouldn't need to care about. Now, the thing that I'm sure you're wondering right here is, okay, so why is this one a normal layer and this one is a smart object? The reason for that is if you drag an image directly into the document, I'm going to hit enter, it becomes a smart object. Let's delete that. Or let's bring it to the top of the layer stacking order, and then let's delete it. However, if you drag it into Photoshop, it opens up as its own document, and then you move that document into this palette, it just sets it up as any old layer. So you can switch something from being a smart object to not being a smart object, and the way to do that is by right-clicking and saying Convert to Smart Object. And you can also turn something from being a smart object to being a normal layer, and the way to do that is by right-clicking and saying Rasterize Layer. But for now, I just wanted you to know the difference between these two things. Essentially, a smart object, you can increase and decrease in size and never lose any information, and a normal layer, you can move things around as you want to your heart's content. And listen, this is just a small showing of the sort of things you can do with the normal layer. But if you decrease it in size, you've lost all of the information. So I just want to make that clear, the difference between a smart object and a normal layer. I'm going to be honest, this business card is looking pretty awful so far, so let's actually get into doing things with that. I'm going to make it so all we have is this layer, and let's make that a normal layer. Or, we'll just keep it as a smart object right there. I'm going to delete all of the layers that we don't really want, and let's just make it so there's a simple image and a simple set of text. But before we do that, I'm noticing something. And what I'm noticing is, wait a sec, this isn't the size of a business card at all. This isn't the dimensions of a business card. So if you create a document and you realize that it's the wrong size, here's how to change it. You go into Image, and there's two options here. One is for image size, and one is for canvas size. Let me show you what the difference between those two are. Image size, if I go here, and you can see that it's 3 by 2.5. An actual business card is 3.5 by 2. So I'm trying to make this 3.5 by 2, and it's not letting me. So in order to change that, I'm going to make it so it doesn't constrain the proportions. So let's set this to 3.5 by 2. I'm going to say OK. And now it changed it to the size of a business card. However, Let's undo and redoing it. In the process of doing that, it stretched everything out. So it changed it to this size, but it also stretched everything out. If I were to go into image size and make it so, here, let's click constrain proportions, and make it so it was only 1 inch tall, it would decrease the size of everything. You'll notice how it's only 1 inch tall rather than 3 inches tall now. And that's not what we want. What we want to do is we want to change the size of the canvas without changing the size of any of the image. And in order to do that, yep, you guessed it, we go into image canvas size. So I'm going to switch this to inches, and I'm going to change this to 3.5 by 2. And then I'm going to say, okay. The new canvas size is smaller than the current canvas size. Some clipping will occur. Proceed. So this changed the size of it, and we'll notice that there's a little bit of clipping, so we lost some, well, we didn't really lose anything. But now this is the right size, and none of the images, none of the layers, none of the objects, those are all the same thing. Those are 3 words for the same thing. None of them changed within the image. So that's how to change the canvas size and how it's different from changing the image size. And now we can actually get into creating a business card, which, my God, we have not been doing at all. So what I want to do for this business card is I don't want to have a rowboat because this guy deals with sand dunes. I want to have a sand dune right here. So you'll notice the opacity is down. I'm going to go into opacity. I'm going to increase the size of it. I'm going to hit Control T to decrease the size of this right here. Here we go. That looks good. And I want to have 20 sand dune pictures along the top of this business card. So in order to do that, I could go here and I could duplicate them one by one, drag it down, get it snap, click both of these, drag these down. If this shows up, just hit cancel. That's all you need to know for now. What's happening right there is I accidentally double clicked. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to shift select these, duplicate this right here, drag it down. This is taking a while. If you want to select multiple layers at once, you can just click and drag. Pay attention to the layer palette when I do this. Click and drag, and you are able to select multiple layers by doing that. Now, one thing you want to make sure of is you're not on top of a layer when you do that, because if I were to click and drag starting from here, all that would do is move this layer, which I don't want. So make sure you're not on top of any layer, click and drag. And now another way to duplicate layers, instead of just grabbing them and moving them down here, is by holding the modifier key Alt. So I'm just holding the modifier key Alt down, I'm clicking and dragging, I'm going to move it to here, and now I want to select all of these. So I'm just going to go here, shift select all of those, press Control T, and then decrease the size of it right here. Now the idea is to get to a point where you're getting very comfortable with layers, and I'm going to increase it so the size of it goes all across the top. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a border going around this entire business card of sand dunes, because who wouldn't want a business card that looks like that? I'm going to hold down Alt, move this to the bottom, and there we go. So there we go. It's at the bottom. And then the last thing I want to do is I'm going to hold down Alt. And let's just hold down Alt again. It'll snap in place by default. And let's hold down Alt one more time. And I guess this bottom layer is going to be a little bit cut off. Not a big deal right there. So I'm just holding down Shift and clicking. Now I'm going to hold, in order to select multiple ones, I'm going to hold down Alt and drag it all the way to the side. Now notice, I can hold down Alt and that will duplicate it. If I had to hold down Shift, it keeps it in a straight line. In general, Shift will constrain things. So I'm just going to hold that down, and that will keep it in a straight line right there. So I'm going to put this right here. Here's a quote about sand dunes. My God, I think I just made the worst business card ever. Not true. I've received far worse business cards than this. So, okay, let's say I want to save this out. I'll save it out. I hand it to the client. I'm not going to show you saving quite yet. And he says, this is good, almost perfect, but I want the left side of the business card sand dunes to be flipped in the other direction. So in order to do that, I'm going to click and drag, and I am going to go to Control T for transform and right click. So I'm in transform mode, which has so far allowed me to increase and decrease the size of the image. But there's a lot of other things that can be done in transform mode. If you notice, if I move the cursor here, I can do things like rotate them around. If I right click, I can do things like flip horizontally, which is exactly what we want. Let's hit enter. If I click and drag, I can grab these right here. Control T for transform. Right click to click horizontally. And then do the same thing for these last third. And right click doesn't do anything because we haven't hit Control T yet. I'm going to hit Control T, and you'll notice there's a problem. When I hit Control T, it selected far too much area. I only wanted to select right here. So let's hit Escape, and that will make it so none of the changes go. And I'm going to do it again. So I clicked outside of it in order to cancel out whatever layers were selected. I'm going to click and drag, hit Control T, and I'm going to hit Escape again. So what's happening? Let's click and drag. What's happening is it also selected this part that has the text on it. So in order to get rid of that, I can do a couple of things. One of them is I can find it in the Layers palette, hold down Control, click it, and then that layer will no longer be selected. That's a bit confusing. The other way to do it is to hold down Shift inside of the canvas, click, and then it won't be selected. If you hold down Shift, you can add and subtract layers from the selection. I think that made sense. I'm going to hit Control T right here, go to Flip Horizontal. There we go. These are flipped horizontally, and now we can mess them up. Wonderful. And let's actually select all of these and use the arrow keys to nudge them down. It didn't work, so I'm going to hit Control Z and try selecting them again. So hit this, hold down Shift, click, and now use the arrow keys to nudge these down ever so slightly. And I'm going to actually select all of these on the bottom as well, because it looks like they're not lined up. And I'm going to move these down. So you'll notice I'm using the arrow keys just to nudge them down so everything kind of aligns how I want. Great. So I give it to the client, and he says, this looks good, I guess, but what I really want is for these to kind of angle to the point to the center. And I say, oh, that's a terrible design choice, but you're the client, and I am a pushover, and that's a good example for showing you a Photoshop demonstration of the transform tool and things with layers, so okay, Sandy Dune. So I can shift select all of these layers, hit Control T to transform, and move it so it goes like this. Now, what did I do right there? Now, I'm going to tell you that you can hold down Control and just shift it so it looks like this, but let me give you a piece of advice. Don't try memorizing what Control does, just as you didn't try remembering what Shift does. Remember that it's one of them, Control, Shift, or Alt that does it. Do this the first time. Don't worry about it. Hit Control Z. I'm telling you, if you hold down Control, you can get this happening, which is pretty cool. I'm going to hold all of these, do the same thing for this. Control T, move this to here, have it snap into place. Do the same thing for all of this, have it snap into place. And all I'm doing is I'm selecting all of them. I am hitting Control T, I'm holding down Control, and I'm moving it so it goes like this. And then I'm going to shift select these, move them up a little bit, and I want to actually move them to the back of the stacking order. So I'm just going to click and drag, so they're now at the back of the stacking order, and do the same thing for these. I'm just going to move them up a little bit, there we go, and move them to the back of the stacking order. And now let's move this into the center. We'll move this right here. Give this to Sandy Dune. He looks at it and says, this is all right, I guess, but what I really want, and then he gives me another command. Now, I'm kind of getting sick of this guy. I'm not going to lie, because what he says is he wants these to be at the bottom and these to be at the top, or maybe at a strip in the middle. Now, what's getting annoying for me is trying to shift select all of them, move them, then shift select these, move these, and then say shift select this, and this time I accidentally pressed it wrong. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to link these groups of 4 together. So if I click just one of them, all of them will instantly get selected. This is such a weird example. That's okay. In order to link all of these layers together, so if you select one, all of them will get selected, there's a little button down here for link, and if I click it, it links them together. So now I'm going to click outside of it, I'm going to click and drag. Notice how there's a little link as if it's a chain link fence. If I click and drag this up, it will move them all together as one. I can do that here as well. So I'm going to shift select all of them, link them, and then I can move something else around, but now when I select them, it moves them all together as one. Here's a quote about sand dunes. Sandy Dune. Let's actually get rid of this layer in back, so I'm just going to delete this. I can just click it and press delete. That accomplishes the same thing. I can just click this and press delete as well. And let's, let's say change the font a little bit. Let's make it so it's right aligned. Looks good to me. Move it so the quote about sand dunes is right here. And now, even after we made those changes, these are still all moving as one layer because we linked them together right there. I want to actually make it so these all work as a single unit and I don't have these absurd amount of layers. So in order to do that, I'm just going to click and drag, and I'm going to create a little folder right here. So I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to click and drag all of these layers, and I'm going to move them into this group. So now, instead of an absurd amount of layers, we have a group that we can turn off as a collective whole. Now what I want to happen is I want to move this group as one. So when I click on this area, I want all of it to move together. Only that's not what's happening. When I click and drag on these individual things, the layers that are linked together move as a grouped unit, a linked unit I should phrase it as, and the layers that aren't linked to anything move individually. But I want to be able to click on this group and be able to move it as a group. In order to do that, I can go up to Auto Select and then go to Group instead of Layer, and now I can move this group as a single unit. And now when I move this down here, this moves down here, and this moves over here. And then make sure to move this back to layers. Another thing that I could do is I could go into all of these right here, I could shift select them, and I could link all of them together as one. And that will make it so even if it's on auto select layer, because they're all linked together, they will only move as a single unit. And one thing that I suggest you do is you make sure that the group is also selected in that. So when I click on the group, everything moves as one. Just a little piece of advice. So rather than having it look like, here we go, rather than having it look like this, notice how the group isn't part of the link? Make sure that that's part of the link as well. Now let me show you one more thing that you can do. If you right click, you can merge these layers together and they all become a single layer. And now, instead of it being a group of different things, it is all in a single layer. It is all a single object. Now, in some ways this is great. This is great because you can move it as one thing. However, let's say the client gets back to you and says, hey, I've got another stupid idea of how to change this truly horrible business card. I don't like the perspective middle part of it right there. Just take that out, man. I like sand dunes. So let's say he says that. Now, because you have linked these all together, you are not able to easily move this section out. The only way to move that section out is to use the, create a square tool, move it right there, use the move tool, and then, move it over here and, get rid of it right there. And that's not great. I mean, here, if I were to go to delete this right here, I'm actually, for some reason, it's moving. It's moving everything. Take a look at this because this is very crucial for understanding layers. Let me go over what I did right there. I used the make a square tool. I moved a section of it over here. And then I went to move this section again to delete it. So let me here, select, deselect. I went to move this section right here, and the whole thing moved. Now I told you that each layer is treated as a single object, which is to say that everything on this layer is considered a single object. Here, let me increase the size of what those layers look like so you can see it in the video. This is all, everything in this is a single object. If I wanted to separate this out into its own object, I would use the Make a Square tool, cut it out with Control X, and then paste it in with Control V. And notice what happens when I press Control V. It pastes it in on its own layer. So now it's able to be treated as a separate object. Now, this is the reason why you don't necessarily want to merge layers together. It makes it so it's very hard to edit them individually. If I were to, for instance, try to select this part right here, I would press Copy, and I'd run into a problem. Whenever you're having a problem, the first place to look is ask yourself, are you on the wrong layer? And if you look at this, you can see that I'm on this layer, and I want to be on this layer. So I click it, and I don't select it. So I click it, I clicked it, now I'm going to click and drag and press Control Copy. Nope, I'm still on the wrong layer. The reason I didn't change layers when I clicked right here is because I was using the Make a Square tool rather than the Move tool. In order to switch which layer you're on, I'm going to go to my Move tool, and then I'm going to click, and you'll notice now it switched to the right layer. And now when I hit Control X and Control V, this appears on its own layer. However, I did the selection wrong. I created a problem, and that's the sort of thing you're going to run into if you merge everything together. So that's one reason not to merge everything together. So let's put these back together again. I'm going to move this up here. Just going to move that up here, and I'm going to move this right here. And now they're all together again, or at least I think they are. However, if I go to click and drag them, they don't move as a single unit. And the reason for that is each layer is treated as its own separate object. So if I want them to be treated as a single layer, I need to shift select all of them, right click, and merge these layers together. And now they're treated as a single object. Now let's undo a few times. I'm just going to undo to before I merge them all into a single layer. There we go. I haven't shown you how to do a multiple undos. Don't worry about it. For your sake, you can just go to the history panel and do it that way. It just stepped through, went backwards in the history panel. If I still had them as separate layers, all I'd have to do is shift select all of them, click the link button, and then I could very easily move them around. So that's how to merge layers together, how to, here we go, merge layers together, how to unmerge them, how to remerge them. I'm going to delete these sand dunes because, my God, they are ugly as sin. And I'm going to go to sand dune right here. I'm going to bring it in, and I am going to select out a part of it. Let's do the right part, and just shift and drag it. Now you'll notice it's not letting me shift and drag. And the reason for that, if you look over here, is it's a smart object. So I'm not really able to edit this layer. So let's change that. I'm going to right click, and it's not letting me have the options that I want. Why is that? Because I right clicked on the thumbnail rather than on the layer. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say rasterize layer. And that makes it go from a smart object to a normal layer. My God, that sounded much more confusing than it is. It's just, I'm trying to tell you all of the problems that you might run into, because that's the place that I see people really having a tough time with. Most of the time you're not going to run into these problems. I just want you to know what happens if you do. So now I can click and drag, move this over here. Looks good. And now when I go to move this over here, well, first thing I need to do is I need to deselect. So let's go to select, deselect. Now I'm going to go and move this over here. And they're both moving. And the reason they're both moving is it's on a single layer. I need to make them on different layers to have them treated as different objects. So I'm going to use my square select tool to go to then cut it out, paste it in, and now I can move it individually because they are on separate layers. So here's a quote about sand dunes. Let me hit Control T. I haven't shown you this, but you can use this on text as well. I mean, you can really use this on text as well, however you want. Anyhow, there's a quote about sand dunes. Let's actually put it down here. Let's actually put it over here. Let's put this up here. And let's move this to, let's just make it red so it's really easy to see. I'm going to my text tool in order to do that. Control A to select all. There we go. Or, in fact, I haven't really shown you colors that much. I can select any color I want just by going down here, or if I take my cursor outside of this tool, I can select any color I want by just selecting anywhere in the image. I get an eyedropper, and it becomes whatever I want. So I'm going to press OK, and I'm going to move to the Move tool, and I'm going to move this over here. Looking pretty good, although actually I want to move this image to the right side of the screen, so let me just move that to the right side of the screen. You notice that the whole image doesn't move because it's two layers and hence two objects, so it's not going to move together. So you guessed it, I'm going to combine them together, right click, merge layers. Now I can move this over here. I can move this over here, and I can move this over here. Now what I want to do is I want to put a square color background behind this text. So maybe something that's blue, I don't know, maybe something that's a little bit gray, I'm not sure. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to my Make a Square tool, the Square Marquee tool, and say that this is the size of the box. Or actually, I think I would do it more like this right here. And that looks pretty good. Here we go. Then I would go to the fill tool. Now, this is the gradient tool, but if we click and hold, we get the paint bucket. The tool palette is a little bit different in 2018. They try to make it so there's fewer tools that you're looking at, the ones that you use most of the time. The very bottom tool, there's an arrow on it that you can see, and if you click and hold that, there we go. It's basically, here's the etc. panel of everything else you can possibly imagine. So if you go down there and if you go past the gradient tool, you'll get to the paint bucket tool, and we're good to go once again, as I was saying. Now with all of these, you'll see that there's little arrows on all of them. So for instance, in the Make a Square tool, if I click and hold, there's also a Make a Circle tool. Or in the, which other one? In the Text tool, there's also things like doing vertical text. There's all sorts of other things right there. For our sake, where it has a gradient tool, there is also a paint bucket tool. And I want to fill it with the color, let's say a light blue. So you'll notice I'm just going outside of the canvas, saying OK. And I just want to fill this in right here. I'm going to click, and it says blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work. So I'm going to press cancel. Now remember, if ever you're having a problem, you're probably on the wrong layer. So I'm going to, here, let's actually click that again. What it's telling me, this type layer must be rasterized before proceeding. Its text will no longer be editable. Rasterize the type. What does that mean? It means I am on a text layer, or a type layer, so I can't add a fill because a type layer, this sort of layer, isn't there for images. It's only there for type. So I'm on the wrong layer. So I need to figure out how to do it on the right layer. So I'm going to cancel. Could not use the paint bucket because the pixels in a type layer cannot be edited without first rasterizing layer. Just as we rasterized the smart object layer, you can also rasterize the text layer. We're going to have a lot of fun with that layer later. I can't talk. So let's select a different layer. I'm going to go to layer 1, hit OK, and that looks good. So I'm going to deselect by going to select, deselect, and I actually want to stretch that out a little bit. So I'm going to, click on it. I'm going to hit Control T, stretch it out, and what's happening? What's happening is I accidentally added this fill on the same layer that the sand dune is on, which is a problem. Because if I want to change this fill at all, I can't, because it's connected. It's the same, it's considered the same object as the sand dune. So let's step back in our history. Here we go, to the point where we were right here. And instead of selecting our sand dune layer, let's hit our background layer. And let's go to our fill tool right here. There we go. And I'm going to go to select, deselect, and try this again. I'm going to hit Control T. Excuse me, I'm going to hit Control T, and you notice nothing is happening. And the reason nothing is happening is because the background layer is locked in place. You notice how there's a little lock sign right here? That's telling us that if you do anything on the background layer, don't expect to be able to transform it. This is just here to set up a background color. So that's no good either. So what I want to actually do is I want to create a new layer that is completely blank that I'm able to put this fill on. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I am going to press fill, and we run into a problem again. So this time, let's go to select, deselect. This time, I'm going to hit Control T, and yes, it's working. That's actually kind of cool right there. It's working, but what it did is instead of filling it up completely, it looked at all of the layers and just tried to fill in the colors that weren't fitting into that. And that's because if we looked at the fill tool, there's a little checkbox up here that asks us, do we want to look at only the current layer or do we want to look at all layers? And we want to look at all layers. So we want to look at none of the layers, just the layer that we're on. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I create a new layer by using the same icon that we use to duplicate layers with, just this create a new layer icon at the bottom of the layers palette. Created a new empty layer, use the fill tool, and now we have the problem of we can't see the text. So in order to solve that, I'm going to go to the layer stacking order, and now we can see the text. We have the problem though that it's overlapping here a bit, so I'm going to go to the layer stacking order and move it down a bit. I want to increase its size, so I'll hit Control T, and now we can increase its size or decrease its size. And you'll notice I'm not hitting Shift because I do actually want to control all of these different things. I could even rotate it about a little bit. I don't want to do that though, so I'm going to hit Control Z, and I am going to hit Enter. Now let me actually name these layers right here. In order to do that, I'm just going to double click and call this box. and call this Dune. Now make sure to double click on the word itself. If you double click anywhere else, you get this window, which is no good. So just double click on the word itself, and then you can change it. So I want to move this and the box together. So in order to do that, we're going to control click both of them, link them together, and now we're able to move these together. I want to left align this text now, so I'm going to go to left align. You'll notice it's not showing up here in the options bar. So if I select the text tool, it will then show up. All right, so let me just move this down, and I'm having a problem now because they're linked together. So in order to unlink them, I'm going to control click the link again, and now undo, move outside of it, and now I can unlink it right there. Control click, link it together one more time. At this point, you have a really good handle of layers. You understand what they are, you understand how to duplicate them, you understand what a text layer is versus a normal layer, versus a smart object, versus a background layer, a locked layer using opacity, deleting layers, duplicating layers, creating new empty layers, linking layers, adding layer groups. You didn't think I taught you that much, did you? You know about the move tool, you know about adding in text, you know about the fill, as well as the fact that there's a gradient tool out there. You even know about creating square shapes. And we're going to move from understanding layers to understanding selection. So what do I mean when I say selection? Let's move this picture of a duck inside of here. Decrease its size a little bit. Remember to hold down Shift in order to decrease its size. Hit Enter, and if I were to put it right there, well, it would look fantastic. It does look fantastic. Would look. What am I thinking about? It's amazing. But if I move it over here, I don't want. I don't want to see the white part. I only want to see the duck. Now, if I were to go here and try to select out only part of the duck, let's Control C, Control V. Obviously, this is not what I want right here. As exciting as these eyes are, they're not what I want. Delete. So how would I make it so I only select out the duck and get rid of the white? I'm going to introduce you to the next selection tool. The next selection tool, you say? Believe it or not, I've already introduced you to one of them, and that is the rectangular, the marquee tool. The make a square tool, as I've been calling it, the make a square selection tool, as I've been calling it, is one of the 3 key selection tools. The other 2 are the Lasso tool and the wand tool. Now, you might see this as the quick selection tool. If you see it looking like this, just click it and move it to the magic wand tool. In CC, they changed what the icon looks like, so if you're looking for these icons and you don't see that, just look for this icon right here, this magic wand with all the sparkles, quick selection, magic wand. Here's what we're selecting in CC. And they each accomplish different things. This one allows you to select an area and is good for things such as we used it for last, creating solid shapes of colors such as we have here. This is good and works like a pair of scissors, whereas this one grabs a single color and allows you to use it. So if I were to use the wand tool, click on the white, what it does is it selects everything that's that shade of white. Now, this worked perfectly because I just recorded this video and then lost the audio. It was an unfortunate thing. What I want this to work is I want it to work horribly the first time through. So let's make it so it works absolutely horribly the first time through, and then I'll show you how to make it so it's actually a viable tool. Stick with me. It's what teaching's all about. And learning, whatever you're doing right now. So the idea is that I click a solid color, in this case white, and it will set the active region to everything that is that color. So if I click this right here, it sets the active region to white. Now, we're running into a couple of problems. The first problem that I see is instead of just making the active region white in this image right here, on this layer right here, it's actually looking for white in the entire image, which isn't very helpful. We only want it to look for the white on this layer. And in order to do that, I'm going to go into the Options panel, and I'm going to deselect Sample All Layers. Let's click just to get rid of that active region, and now I'm going to click this again. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to press delete. Could not completely request because your smart object is not directly editable. Oh, a problem with the smart object? How do we solve that? We right click and we rasterize the layer, and now it is editable. So if I press delete, and let's deselect that, you'll notice that it did a good job of getting rid of the white, but it also got rid of the eyes right there. Let's go back a couple of steps. And now, instead of just using this, there's another checkbox that's pretty important right here, contiguous, or is it touching? And now it won't only look for everything in the image that's white, it will only look for the white area of the areas that are touching. So when I click this and press delete and deselect, we get this duck and none of the white background right there. And at the very basics, that's how the Magic Wand tool works. Now, let's say I wanted to put this duck behind the sand dune right there. If I tried to use the box tool for that, it wouldn't really work. If I tried to use the Magic Wand tool for that, it wouldn't really work. So I'm going to show you another tool, the Lasso tool, which works essentially like a pair of scissors. So let's say that I wanted to put this duck behind the sand dune. Now, in order to do that, what I would have to do is I would need to cut this sand dune out, put it in front, and in that way, have it so the duck is behind it. So I'm going to introduce the Lasso tool. The way the Lasso tool works is you click, and then every time between each of these clicks, so you can see that I just kind of keep clicking, every time between each of these clicks, a line forms, and it works exactly like a pair of scissors. And by exactly like a pair of scissors, I mean, it's not sharp, you can't cut yourself on it, but you're able to, it's nothing like a pair of scissors. That was just an analogy. The use of the word exact was inexact. Don't worry about it. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click until I get to that original point. And when I get to the original point, I just double click. And that creates an active region in whatever shape I want. Then all I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control-C to copy. And you'll notice could not copy because it's on the wrong layer. If ever there's a problem, the first place to look is, are you on the right layer? In this case, we can see that the duck layer is selected. In fact, let's call this duck. And the dune layer is not selected. So if I go to dune, press on it, and then hit Control-C, and then Control-V to paste, it pastes right here. Now we're running into a problem. And that problem is that it didn't paste exactly where we wanted it to. Instead, it kind of moved it over to the left a little bit. So let's undo that. And instead of just pressing Control-V to paste, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Edit, Paste Special, and go to Paste in Place. And now it will paste directly there. Now, it looks like nothing has happened. Jeremy, you didn't paste it at all. You did nothing. This is embarrassing. What an embarrassing teacher you are. You have accomplished... Stop making fun of me, okay? Just stop it. Okay. Here's what happened. That was really mean. What happened was it pasted the layer, but because it is directly on top of the other layer, you can't see that that's happening. So I can actually move this right here, and there's two layers here, only because it's the same thing and it's directly on top of it, you can't see. So now if I move this duck here, well, nothing's happening. But if I sandwich it between the layer and itself, you can see that it's now ducking out, peeking out behind the mountains. Now you can see that there's this little blue line that we don't want right here. So in order to get rid of that, I'm just going to go into this Lasso tool, and I'm just going to go a little bit further, deeper to make this happen. Those of you who have used Photoshop in the past probably know there's a few better ways to do what I'm showing right here. Don't worry, I'll be showing that later. All right, and I'm going to press delete in order to delete everything in the active region. Now notice what happened isn't what I wanted. Whenever there's a problem, the first place to look is if you're on the wrong layer. So let's undo that, and I can see that I'm on the duck layer, and I want to be on the dune layer. So I'm going to hit delete, and again, what I wanted didn't happen. I want to get rid of that blue lane. And instead, I deleted out from the dune layer, not what I want, from the bottom dune layer as opposed to the top dune layer. So I'm going to go here, press delete. This time I'm on the right layer, deselect just by clicking, and it works. Giant ducky is there. So that looks pretty good, and those are the basics of the Lasso tool. Let me show you one other way that you could have actually approached this problem, because there's multiple ways to approach any problem in Photoshop. And the other way to approach this problem would be to look at the duck and to approximate where this sand dune is, create an active region right here, press delete, which deletes everything inside of the active region, and then deselect. And you'll notice, okay, you're running into a problem right here that you weren't exactly right. So let's go back in the history to here and say, okay, no, I'm going to actually do a good job with this lasso tool. And in order to do that, I'm going to decrease the opacity of the duck. Create this here. Let's create this little active region exactly where we want it. Make it so the opacity is up again. See what I did right there? Fancy schmancy. Press delete. Nothing's happening. Why is nothing happening? Are we on the wrong layer? No, we're on the right layer, although it looks like opacity is here. I'm just going to select right here, press delete, and now we have a problem, and that problem is there's still a little bit of a blue line right there. So let's move the duck down a little bit. I went to the move tool, nudge it down, and you can see that even though this solved the problem, it is significantly less flexible. I can't move the duck up and down. It's just a far less elegant solution. And this happens a lot in Photoshop. There's multiple ways to get it looking like this. However, one of them makes it so there's a layer on its own that looks like this, and there's really not a lot of customizability. And the other one, here, let's go back in our history. Here we go. And the other one has all sorts of flexibility, and it's just a much more elegant solution, leaving us with a background layer that looks like that, a full duck that's movable, and a layer on top of that that looks like this. All right, so that's the lasso tool right there. In the next video, I'm going to show you how you can do far more advanced options with the wand tool because, frankly, a completely white background isn't a very realistic example. Let's say that you have an image that looks like this. So here we go. And what you want to do is you want to take this image and you want to put it in here. Now, I'm going to bring this to the top of the layer stacking order, and I'm going to decrease the size of it. So I hit Control T, I can't see the whole thing, so if I hit Control 0, I'll be able to show you the whole thing. Move it right there. There we go. Put that right there, and as wonderful as this looks, I have to say, quite frankly, I don't believe that it's inside of this image. How would I get rid of the sky right here? Now, I could try doing it with the lasso tool, but frankly, I imagine that would take forever, trying to cut it out. And also, there's a very solid color. I switched between the tabs right there. You can see me doing that. Also, there's a very solid color in the background, and whenever you see a single solid color, it should send an alert that this is probably a good place for the magic wand tool. So for instance, if you had a green screen image, that would be a good place for the magic wand tool. We have this image, and I am going to select it right here, and what I want to do is I want to select everything that's the blue sky. So here we go. Here, let's I'm actually trying to make it so it doesn't work fantastically the first time out of the gate. Otherwise, this becomes too easy. All right, so I want to select everything that's this blue sky. So I went to the magic wand and I clicked on the color, and it selected some of it, but not all of it. And why didn't it select everything that's blue? Now, there's a reason for that. If you'll notice, and let's actually zoom in quite a bit in order to notice this, all of these individual pixels aren't exactly the same shade. So you can see how there's actually very different shades of blue happening. And what's going on there and what's going on down here is a much darker version of blue. Or up here, it's another darker version of blue. And when we click on an individual point, say this point right here, what Photoshop is saying is, okay, I see the color of this individual pixel. I'm going to go 15 shades in one direction, 15 shades in the other direction, and that'll be approximately the right color right there. And that 15 shades in one direction, 15 shades in the other direction is something called tolerance. Now, by default, and don't write this down, by default, tolerance is set to 32. So if you have it at 32, that will probably get the job done in most cases. And you can see that it does a pretty good job in this case. However, if it doesn't seem to be working, you can also make it so it's, higher, increase it by a little bit. So I'm just setting it to 60 here. Or you can make it lower. Now this is out of, I'm not even going to tell you what it's out of, 255, because it doesn't matter. Just be aware that if you're using an image and instead of getting the selection you want, you're getting something like this, you can always decrease it. I'll generally do it, I'll double it, and then I'll use increments of 30, or I'll use increments of 15, and I'll just half how much I'm changing it, and play around with it until you get what you want. Now, I'm going to zoom in a bit just to make sure that this is exactly what I want. And when I zoom in a bit, I can actually see that this is selecting too much. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to actually turn this tolerance to 32. I hit Control 0 to see the whole image. Select all of this, and let's zoom in again. And that looks like a much better edge right there. However, it's not getting all of these little spaces down here. So, in order to do that, I am going to uncheck Contiguous. Remember, we turned it on for the ducky because we didn't want to select the eye. Well, now we do want to select all these little bits. So I'm going to click here. And now you can see that it does a good job of selecting everything in the image that's that color. So if I hit delete, it deletes everything that we don't want. But there's a problem. And the problem is the active region was a little bit too much. So I'm going to step back in the history right there. I'm going to deselect it right there. I'm going to select it again. Here we go. Select it again. And you'll notice here, actually, if I try different parts of it, you'll notice that it does it differently because it's a range based off of the pixel that I'm directly over. This looks like a pretty good one. And it's almost perfect, except for these pieces over here. I don't want to delete them. I only want to get rid of the sky. This is where selection becomes interesting. I say interesting. I think you'll dig it. Stay with me. Now, you can't do a selection with a single click. Like the selection I gave you with the duck, even the selection I gave you with the hill were very simple examples of cutting things out and creating an active region that was very simple. Generally, if you're trying to get rid of a background, you'll do one broad stroke that will get almost the majority of the color, and then you'll need to make little adjustments to make it so the selection is absolutely perfect. Now, when you use these selection tools, you probably won't only use one. What you'll do is you'll use them together to make the selection that much better. Let me show you what I mean. I can affect how this selection is. So with one click, I was able to get this to happen, which is pretty good with one click. However, I want to subtract from this selection. I want to, say, click and drag this area and be able to fix that. How did I do that? The way that I did that is I went to my selection tool, the square selection tool, or the rectangular marquee, and I didn't just click and drag, because if I clicked and dragged, that would start a new selection. That's not what I want. Instead, I held down Alt, and you'll notice when I hold down Alt, a little minus sign appears next to the pointer, next to the marquee. Again, you don't need to remember Alt. Just hit the different modifier keys, and you'll notice that it changes in different ways. If you do it the wrong way, don't worry about it. You can always press undo. So again, don't memorize the modifier keys. Just remember one of the modifier keys subtracts, one of them adds. So if you hold down Alt, you're able to subtract from the selection. So I'm holding down Alt, a minus sign appears, and then I have my general selection, and I'm also able to make minor changes that affect the entire thing. So I'm just clicking it again and again. Don't just click and drag because that'll start a new selection. Not what you want. If you accidentally do that, not a big deal. Just hit Control Z, hold down Alt, subtract from the selection. If you accidentally hit Shift, not a big deal. Just hit Control Z. And now we have a much better selection. I notice there's still a couple of problems with these. You can see the dancing ants giving me a sign. So I want to get rid of this. I accidentally went the wrong way. I'm going to hit Control Z. If I hold down Shift, it adds to the selection. Alt subtracts, Shift adds. Feel free not to memorize that and just to do it wrong and see what happens. And now I can delete everything inside this active region, and I'm left with this. So let's get rid of this selection by going to Select, Deselect, and move this layer over here. This is looking pretty good. I'm going to delete this layer right here, and I'm going to decrease the size of this one right here. So I'm just going to hit Control 0 to see the whole thing, move it up right there, hit Control 0 again just to see the whole canvas. Looking pretty good. I think a sand thing would look about that size. And let's actually put it behind the sand dune. Let's turn off the ducky. And there we go. Now we've got a sand dune going in this image. And, you know, we spent a lot of time, that looks decent. I'm pretty happy with that. And we spent a lot of time working with this. Let me show you one more thing that we could do this, other than adding it into the world's worst business card. Something else that we could do is we could completely change the background. So, for instance, we could put in a background of a sunrise, And I haven't shown you how to do this yet, and I'll show you how to do color correction later, but let's just assume that the next step would be fixing the colors and immediately get it looking from this to this. And this took us a while. This video took a while, but to give you an idea of how quickly you can do that once you have a pretty good handle of the wand tool, it consists of a grand total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and here, let's move this right here, 9, and 10. Once you know what you're doing with this, you can do it so much faster. So that was looking at the wand tool. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to deal with images that have far more confusing backgrounds than this blue one. We'll deal with an actually complicated background and how you can select out really anything. And we're going to get into the lasso tool and also into the quick selection tool. Let's ramp up selection a little bit. Let's say that we have an image such as this one, which we do because I have it right here, which is why I'm showing it to you. We're going to ignore my previous times working with this image. And let's say that we want to select this from the background. Now, if I were to use the wand tool, I'm not having too much success with it right here. So I'm going to actually increase the tolerance, and let's increase that to 50. And it's not doing a particularly good job. So I'm going to put it on contiguous. And 50 is doing a pretty good job. Now, I showed you that if you pressed Shift Select, you could add to a selection. That's not only true of when you're using the rectangular marquee tool. You can actually do that with any of the 3 selection tools. So if I hold down Shift, notice that a plus sign appears right there. And now, if I do that with all of these different areas right here, I can actually do a pretty good job of getting this selection how I want it. I need to adjust it further, but it's a pretty good job. Let's actually bring this down to 40 and try it again. Now, this is a pretty good job, but it's just bad enough that it's awful. So there's that. There's that right there. So instead of using this, let's see what happens if we use the lasso tool. So I'm going to zoom in a bunch, which is generally what I do when I'm using the lasso tool. And I'm just going to select around, and already you can tell that trying to select around this entire object with the lasso tool is excruciating. So I wouldn't want to do it that way. So there's actually a slightly better tool called the magnetic lasso tool. In 2018, the magnetic lasso tool is located in the etc. section, so you can find it right here. So I just clicked and held, went to the magnetic lasso tool. If I hold down Shift, I can add to the selection. So I'm going to add to the selection doing this, and now instead of needing to click for all of the points, all I need to do is hold my mouse over where the general outline is, and I can do a pretty good job of getting that outline right there. So you'll notice I'm just holding over, and it's going pretty quickly to find the difference. Now you'll notice that it had a bit of a problem on that corner, so I'm going to hit delete a couple of times, and if you hit delete, you can get rid of the most recently done points. That's something with the lasso tool, with the magnetic lasso tool, a couple of tips for it right there. And if I click right here, that'll guarantee that a point is set on the corners. So with the lasso, so you can see there's a little bit of a mistake that happened right there. If I hit delete a couple of times, I'm just going to go back over it, and I can click on this corner. And so I'm going to click here. And something I want to show you right here is if you hold down space, you can pan around even if you're in the middle of using the lasso tool or the magnetic lasso tool. So I'm trying to get to the original point right here, which I'm doing. I'm going to double click, and that will make it so it links it back to the area, and we have a active region that's more or less in the shape we want. But that only covered this much region, and even that would be excruciating. And you know, let's say that you're working on it, and here let's just start working on it, and you're going through it, and you accidentally double click, and you are going to accidentally double click, and you get this happening. At this point, your selection is awful. So you need to either go back a step or you need to restart. So something I suggest when using the lasso tool is always start from the center. So rather than starting from this edge point, you'll notice how I'm starting from the very edge of the statue right there and double clicking. I accidentally double clicked and I got this area. If you select from the center first and then go along the edge, notice how I'm going along the edge, and it will actually move this up, and then I double click accidentally, it will get all of this area as I wanted. If I started from here, it goes back to the origin point and it moves it right there. So that's one way to solve a problem. However, with that said, this would still take longer than I want to spend on it. So there's one more tool that I want to show you, and this will be the last of the selection tools that I'm showing you, and it is the Quick Select tool. This is something that was new in, I don't know, CS3, and it is an amazing, amazing feature in Photoshop. In the options bar, you can set how large this is going to be. So that doesn't seem quite big enough. I'm just clicking on it right here. Let's make it size, there we go, 50 something. And all you need to do is click and drag. So notice how I'm just clicking and dragging, and that will just create a selection of everything that you're clicking and dragging over. So it looks for similar colors, and it does an amazing job at it. So it's like the magic wand, only instead of just looking at a single point, it looks at everything that you clicked over. Now, this alone isn't going to actually create a good selection. It'll create a decent selection that needs work. In order to get it to its final state of actually working, you'll use the Lasso tool. So I'm going to use the Lasso tool, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to make all of those tiny little adjustments just to make it go from decent but unusable to actually usable. And I'm looking for all of the mistakes that the magic wand, that the quick selection tool caused. And I just hold down Alt and I subtract from the selection. And that's it. That's all you need to do. I went a little bit too far right here. So I hold down Shift and I'm able to add to the selection right here. Let's say that you accidentally hold down the wrong one. Let's do that. So let's say right here I want to fix that corner a little bit, and instead of subtracting from the selection, you add to the selection. No big deal. Just press Undo, Control Z, and then go through it, and then you're able to subtract from the selection right there. And it's going to have problems. The places where it will have the most problems is where there isn't a huge area of contrast. So you'll notice up here, the difference between the background and the foreground isn't really all that big of a difference. So because of that, you need to go in and fix it manually. And that's generally how all of the tools work in Photoshop. You try to automate things as much as you can, something breaks in some part of what you tried to automate, and then you fix it by going through and, getting it perfect. Now, there is nothing more boring in Photoshop than trying to get a pixel perfect selection. Right now, I'm sure this is somewhat interesting to you. I guarantee you that after you've done it for, say, 3 hours, you will be absolutely sick of making selections. The idea is to make sure that you're making them in as easy of a way as possible, and to not try and kill yourself by making selections that are nearly impossible, and it would be better to just retake the photographs. You can see all that I'm doing is I'm going through, I'm very zoomed in right now, and I'm just shift selecting and alt selecting. I make it look easy. I guarantee it isn't. And when I press delete, something weird happens, and I'm going to actually ignore this panel right here. What might happen is when you open up an image, it shows up as background with a lock sign, and then when you try to do things like move pixels around, delete something inside of an active region, weird things happen. If that's the case, the first place to always look is in layers, and if this is the way that the layer looks, all you need to do is double click the name and rename it to anything you want. So I'm just going to name it to statue, press OK, and now it's normal. The layer is unlocked, and it's not a background layer. So let's press delete, and that's not exactly what I wanted to happen. I wanted the background to disappear. So I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to right-click and press Select Inverse. And now what was the active region switches from what it was. So instead of this being the active region, I'm just doing this for the sake of example, instead of this becoming the active region, now this becomes the active region. So let me just right click, press Select Inverse, and now when I hit delete, the active region is this. So this deletes. I'm going to deselect by going to Select, Deselect, go to my Move tool, and move it into the layer move it into the image that I want to move it into. Hit Control T to change its size. I can't see the corners, so I'm going to hit Control 0 just to see everything. Move it here, move it up right there. Hit Control 0 again to see everything, and let's actually move this in front. So there we go, and in fact, I am going to decrease it in size even a little bit further, and let's put it behind this hill, because why not? That seems like something someone might do. And we'll use the same techniques that we were using before. So I'm going to turn it off, and I am just going to select around this hill with the Lasso tool. The Lasso tool is kind of my blunt instrument when I don't feel like taking out a very specialized equipment. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to make sure I'm on the right layer. I'm going to press Control-C to copy, and then I'm going to go to Edit, Paste Special, Paste in Place. Put the statue back on, move it back here, and now we have it so it's going behind this hill. I went pretty fast right there. I suggest you rewind and try to make sense of what just happened right there, because it was combining a lot of the lessons that we've used so far. Now I could try and make this fit better into the image with color correction, but we're going to skip that for right now. Let's go back here. And let me do one more thing with this image. I'll do the same thing that I did to the previous one because, hey, why not? We just spent all of that time selecting. I might as well get something somewhat useful out of it. So let's move this down here. Let's move this up here. Let's actually increase the size of this sunset with Control-T. Just going to move that right here. And again, we'll be doing color correction in a little bit. But for now, I'll just move it to that. Whoop-de-doo. We were able to change this image from looking like this to looking like this. So far we've selected a statue, we've selected a water tower, we even selected a duck, which I'm going to turn off right now. Let's escalate the difficulty by quite a bit, and I'll show you how you can go about selecting hair. Something weird just happened with my mouse. So I'm going to get rid of all of these extraneous layers right there. There we go. So we have one layer that looks like this. Now, I told you the good place to start was with the quick selection tool, so let's do that right here, and let's try selecting her using the quick selection tool. Now, trying this, you can see that I am not getting the strands of hair at all. If this isn't working, I'm going to go to Select, Deselect. Instead of trying to select the foreground, if the background is a more uniform color, try selecting that. So I'm going to do that, and this doesn't seem to be working either. So I'm going to deselect that. If that's not working, I'm going to try using the magic wand tool. And let's not select contiguous. Let's just do it like this. And that does a slightly better job. You can see how it does a pretty good job right there. But I'm still not entirely happy. So if I were to, here, let's invert the selection. So here we go. Invert. I'm looking for select inverse, copy, and paste. Let's turn off this layer right here. You can see that this is a pretty lackluster selection of hair. So instead of using any of the tools that I've shown you so far, oh, and by the way, we're going to fix these areas later. Don't worry about that for now. Instead of using any of these tools that we've used so far, let's try one more tool. Go into Select, Color Range. And the way this works is very similar to the magic wand. You click a color that you want to get selected, so for instance, this right here, and then instead of calling it tolerance, they call it fuzziness. Otherwise, it's basically the same feature. Something that's different or actually something that's also similar to the magic wand is you can press Shift and you can select another color as well. So now we have two colors being selected and we're looking for a range of colors right there. And you'll notice that we get a black and white image of exactly what's being selected. What's white is going to be in the active region, what's black isn't in the active region. And what I suggest you do is rather than trying to go too far, try so you're not going quite far enough. You see that? So I don't have too much selected right there. There's a few things that we can do right here. We could select things like localized color clusters. Detect faces is something that's new in Photoshop CS6. For now, we're just going to leave it on the most basic options, and I'm going to press OK. And now the active region is set to this. And if I were to just press delete right here, it's the wrong part of it that we're deleting. Or wait, it's the right part of it that we're deleting. That was exactly what I wanted. Now, something that I suggest whenever you're dealing with a more complicated selection, or really whenever you're messing up a layer in any way, is before you delete things, especially if you're not sure it will work, duplicate the layer, turn off the original layer, and just have that as a backup, just in case something doesn't work. All right, so let's try this again. I'm going to press delete, and I am going to deselect. Select, deselect. And you'll notice that this did a halfway decent job. But there's a couple of problems. First off, there's a lot of gaps in her clothes right here. Second off, there's some gaps up there. Third off, there's this white area right here. So let's fix the white areas first. I could tell you like 6 or 7 more complicated ways to do it, but doing it in the most complicated way is rarely the best way to go. Generally, the best way to do it is think of 3 or 4 very simple tools, combine them together in a complicated way, and that will get you the most powerful results. Now, I'll be honest. No one selects hair by just using the tools that I'm showing you right here, but as a very basic way to do it without introducing something like masks, it's a good way to think about it. So you can see that there's kind of problems right there, but I just want to get a basic selection. Let's just delete this, and let's do the same thing down here. And that's looking pretty good, although not great. So let me actually introduce another tool, and that's the eraser tool. So it looks like an eraser. It looks like this. And just as with the other brushes, you can increase its size by going here, and you can decrease and increase its hardness also by going here. What do I mean by hardness? If I were to use a stroke like this is 100% hardness. If I were to go here and put it to this is 0% hardness. So that's what I mean by hardness. So I'm going to actually decrease the size of this a bunch. There we go. I'm going to decrease the size of it a bunch, and I'm just going to erase out areas that I don't want. This is looking pretty good. I'm just going to erase out all of these areas right here. I don't want them. I'm not going to worry about them too much. And it kind of looks like a hard edge there, so I'm just going to use my eraser tool to erase out all of these areas. Looks pretty good. I'm going to increase the size of the eraser, so here we go. Let's just increase the size of the eraser. Are there shortcut keys for this? Yes. Am I showing them to you right now? No, I'll show them to you a little bit when we get into fixing. So just going to erase all of that. And that's looking better, but still have the problem of how to get this area back in. We still have the problem of how to get this area back in. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go back to the original image. I'm going to use my lasso tool, and I am going to very sloppily, that's not a word, but I'm going to use it. I'm going to very sloppily copy this and then go to Edit, Paste, Paste in Place. And I actually have a problem right here. And the problem is that I was on the wrong layer. I was trying to, excuse me, let's go step back. I was trying to copy and paste from this layer, but if I pressed Control-C and then Edit, Paste in Place, what I ended up doing is I pasted from the wrong layer. So whenever there's a problem, the first place to look, so you'll notice that all I have is a duplicate of this layer. If ever there's a problem, the first place to look is, are you on the wrong layer? Just undo a couple of times, go into your history, undo, set yourself on the right layer, copy, edit, paste in place. So now we have 2 layers. Well, we have other layers, but we have 2 layers. One that looks like this, and one that looks like this. If we sandwich them on top of each other, we get the combination of both of them, which fixes the problem of all of these missing pieces. It looks like actually over here there's a bit of a problem, so let's go back to this original one and let's spend a little bit more time actually getting this selection dead on. Now I could use something like the pen tool right here, but like I said, I want to try using the simplest tools possible and not introducing new tools in order to create more advanced results. So copy, edit, paste in place. And now we're going to combine these 3 layers. And that's actually looking pretty good. Although I can see actually this side right here also needs more definition. So I'm going to go to this original one. And the reason for that is you can see that there's a little reflection of the sky in her face. And that's just that got caught up when we did the color range. So I'm just going to go around and you can see that I've zoomed in order to do this. While using the lasso tool, I'm also hitting the space bar, clicking and dragging to move it down further, just so I'm always working in the middle of the screen, which I find a lot easier than working in these top parts right there, and also better for the sake of you watching it. And I'm going to do one more time, making sure I'm on the right layer, copy, and then Control-Shift-V to paste in place. And now what we have is this, 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 and this. So we went from this to this. That looks pretty good. Now, if we were to give it a more give it a more forgiving background, it would look even better. However, if we were to give it an even harder background, let's say a red background, all of the flaws would start to appear. So obviously this selection method isn't perfect. I would need to go through and with more detail go in with my eraser, probably decrease the size with it, play with it for a while. Excuse me. Play with it for a while and, you know, get to a point where I was happy with it. But if we are just putting it on a solid background like this, excuse me, like this, it does a pretty fine job. So that's what color range does right there. There are far more advanced methods for selecting hair, but we're going to move on. And for now, understand that we've followed some really powerful things for selection. I want to call out that CC does have some automated selection features, and I'm intentionally not talking about them because I've found that, you know, that was just going to select subject. I found that they don't work as well as I would like. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, now go into select focus area. And again, I'm watching this not work as well as I would like. So, you know, I'm sure with other subjects, these work great, but I'm still using the techniques that I was using back in Photoshop CS6, but just calling out that features have been added that I don't use. We're going to switch gears for a bit and talk about color. So let's say you have an image like this and you want to fix the colors so they actually look, you know, usable. The options for color are located right here. We have this half moon cookie sort of icon. And you click it, you can see there's 19 options up here. Don't worry, we're not going to play with all of them. I'm going to show you the 4 or 5 that are actually useful. So the first one I want to show you is brightness or contrast. And when I click it, a layer pops up. And this isn't like a normal layer. What it is it's a color adjustment layer. So here, let me just do a random adjustment here. It's a color adjustment layer, and everything below this color adjustment layer gets adjusted. So on this layer, on this layer, there aren't any, you know, objects. It just affects the layers that are below it. So if we had multiple layers below it, we'd see all of them affected when this was on, and, you know, none of them affected when it was off. The other thing that popped up was this right here, the properties panel. So I'm going to actually drag this out of this smorgasbord of panels, exit out of all of this, and drag this in so it is up here. So here we go. We have the properties panel up here, and we have the layers panel down here. And now I'm going to click auto. And when I click auto, it does an auto adjust of the brightness and contrast of this image, which fixes it to a great degree. Let's say we had an image like this. Now, if I were to go to brightness and contrast and click auto for this one, it's not going to work because brightness and contrast aren't the two problems with this image. The problem with this image is that it's a bit too blue, so I'm going to use a different tool called color balance. And if I open up color balance, you'll notice that all of the options appear inside of the properties panel. What I want to do is I want to make it less blue, which if you'll notice actually makes it more yellow. And right now I'm affecting the midtones. We know that because it says midtones up here. If I go to shadows, I'm able to affect the shadows right here. And this is looking a little bit too yellow, so here we go. That looks much better. So just the difference between this and this. It's a subtle difference, but it's a big difference. The last tool, let's say that we went to levels here. Last tool that I wanted to show you in this video was levels right here. I'm going to click auto, and it does an all right job. And what you can see that it's doing is it's moving the white point from here to here, and it's moving the black point from here to here. And in that way, it adds more contrast. So I'm going to actually move the white point all the way over here to add even more contrast, and move the black point a little bit further down. And this middle adjuster just kind of affects how all the midtones lie. And right there, let's turn this on and off. And I'm going to actually push this so it's a little bit further than I'd like. So here we go. It's significantly further than I'd like. And rather than adjusting this right here, I can actually bring down the opacity of the color adjustment layer, and in this way achieve about, say, a compromise between complete color adjustment and what I had before. So those are the 3 tools that I wanted to show you. Hue saturation, I didn't show you, but color balance, brightness and contrast, and levels. And with those 3, you can really solve the color of just about any image. So if I had an image such as this one, I'm going to go to levels, going to hit auto, I'm going to bring it in a little bit more. Here we go, let's make it brighter. And let's adjust the midpoint right there. And we have the difference between this and this. And so even though we are able to adjust and get a little bit of a fix of the colors with those three right there, fact of the matter is I don't use any of them. All of those, garbage. The one tool that I use for virtually all color correction is a tool called curves. And people are generally intimidated when they look at this tool for the first time because, let's face it, it's an intimidating looking tool. It has this mysterious line that goes like this. If I hit auto, all sorts of strange things happen on this line. And in the next video, I'm going to get into how to use this tool, what it's doing, and why you don't really need to be scared by it. Remember when I said we'd be doing curves next? That was a lie. Turns out most people don't have any idea what I'm talking about when I say let's correct the color of an image. They have some semblance of the color is bland, I want to make it good. Oh, I can see how the image is not good, I want to make it better. I'm looking at something, it seems bluish, but honestly that isn't really understanding what's happening when I take an image from this to this. What exactly am I affecting? What are our goals when we're looking at an image and trying to fix its color? And that depends on the image. There are three dimensions of color that we're trying to fix. And this video gets a little bit into theory, but I assure you I am not going to bore you because that's not really what I do. There's three goals that we're trying to shoot for when we're fixing the color of an image. One, we're trying to make it so the lightest point in image, or the lightest point on an image that here. Let's go to this one right here. The lightest point on the point of focus of an image. So not over here. We don't care about this right here. But say right here, that lightest point is actually white, or maybe right here. Also that the darkest point is actually black. And also that the midpoints are a neutral gray rather than being, you know, some weirdo bluish tone. So that's actually what happened in this video. The neutral grays were all blue. We wanted to make it, well, the neutral grays weren't so neutral after all. The most neutral thing that was supposed to be gray was actually a bluish tone. And that's called color casting, and it's a matter of fixing that. So there's three dimensions to look at when fixing color. One is that the lightest light is actually white, and the darkest dark is actually dark, so that's fixing the value. Two, neutral gray is actually neutral gray, and not, as was the case in that cat photo, some weirdo like bluish neutral thing, and everything had a bluish color tint to it. So making the neutral gray neutral, and also, and that's called fixing the chroma. And also that the reds are actually red, the blues are actually blue, and the purples are actually blue. And that's fixing the hue. And these are the three dimensions of color. A lot of people, when they think about color, they think of, oh, there's orange, and there's green, and there's yellow, and there's all sorts of colors, and they don't really relate to each other in any way. That's not how it works. There's an order to all of the hues. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. You've learned this. Roy G. Biv. I guarantee you've heard that term. And there's a reason that color wheel is so important. It tells us how fixes will work. I'll show you that in a bit. So it's important to understand hue is one thing that we might be fixing. Chroma, or getting that neutral gray, is another thing. And value, making sure that the whites are white enough and the darks are dark enough, are the third thing. All right, is that enough theory? Are you like, all right, let me just see how to correct the images? Great. Big thanks to Jonathan Poor for this diagram right here. In fact, let me thank the various photographers as I use them. So in an image like this, like I said, this was going to talk about curves. And you know what? Let's actually do that in the next video. This will just have been on color theory, and I'm actually going to talk about using curves to correct these three dimensions of color in the next video. We're going to start fixing the color of these images the way that I actually go about fixing the colors of images. First place I go is I go here and I go to curves. Now there's a button for auto right here, but I want to be perfectly honest with you. In CS6 they changed the auto options, and now they made it much, much worse. So the default auto option is, well, decent, creates some weirdo contrasty Photoshoppy look, which I generally try to avoid. If you go up here to this drop-down box, there's an option for auto options. And instead of using enhance brightness and contrast, go to enhance per channel contrast. And that's the one that you want to be using. Got it? Press OK. So I'll show you that again in the next one. And then just kind of increase this up here maybe, decrease this down here. If you get it a little bit of an S-curve, you might be able to increase the contrast a little bit more. And so we had it go from this to this. Let's go to the next image. And we're going to go, no, not this. We already learned that in the last video. So let's go to the image that I actually want us to go to, this one. So this is where we're trying to get to, and this is where we're currently at. So I am going to, get rid of that and create a new curves layer. So let's do a curves color adjustment layer. Shows up in my properties panel, as we've already learned. Going to go here, going to go to auto options, set it at enhance per channel contrast rather than enhance brightness and contrast. Press OK, and this doesn't look all that great. Honestly, the auto options, even if I give it a little bit of an S-curve, isn't exactly where I want it to be. So rather than just using the out-of-the-box options, I'm going to show you another trick that's really, really incredible. Inside of curves, there's 3 eyedroppers located right here. One for setting the white point, one for setting the black point, and one for setting the midpoint. Remember when I told you that the 3 main things to care about when color correcting an image is the white point, the black point, and the midpoint? I hope you do. It was like 3 minutes ago in tutorial world space. Well, this is how to do that really, really simply. Click on this white eyedropper and go to what you want to be the whitest point in the image. So let's say you want this to be the whitest point. Perfect. Go to the black eyedropper and say maybe you want this to be the blackest point in the image. Clicked it wrong? Not a big deal. Click on another area until you're happy. That looks pretty good. Then go to this middle eyedropper and go to where you think is a neutral gray. So maybe this is a neutral gray. Maybe this is a neutral gray. I kind of like the look of that second one right there. And in just 3 clicks, setting a white point, a black point, and a midpoint, we have colors that went from this to this. Pretty cool. All right, let me show you another image. No, or actually, this actually is a little bit too strong. Before I get out of this image, I'm pretty happy with this color correction. I just think it's a little bit too strong. So instead of messing around with this curves panel, which I'm pretty happy with, I'm just going to bring down the opacity of this color correction layer. So I'm just bringing it down to about 70%. And now I'm that much more happy with it. Thank you, UbrayJ02 for that image. Don't save. All right, so let's do it again here. I'm going to get rid of the already having corrected it. Go to curves. You'll notice that I use curves for basically every single image. Press on auto. If you see this line changing, that means that it's the lousy version of the auto. So go into this little box, go to auto options, enhance per channel contrast, press OK, and we have it going from this to this. And let me actually show you the difference between these 2 versions of auto. So it's the difference of making it go to this to the difference of it making it go to this, which is why I say use enhance per channel contrast. I'll explain what that means down the line. For now, just click it, okay? So that's looking pretty good. Maybe I want to make this a little bit brighter just by moving this up, maybe a little bit darker by moving it down. So in just 2 clicks, we had it go from this to this. All right, next one, let's do it. Let's say you have an image like this. This one's a little bit harder, which is why I like using it as an example. The end goal, The end goal that we're shooting for is something that looks like this. So let's make that happen. And here, let me just drag this up to the top of the layer stacking order and start adding new curves color adjustment layers. Excuse me. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to click curves. And I'm going to start by hitting auto. This is the icky auto that we have no interest in using. I'm going to go to auto options and go to this, enhance per channel contrast, and let's turn that on and off. It looks all right, but it's not nearly as powerful as I want it to be. Here's the reason. When you click on auto, it looks for the whitest point on the image, or excuse me, it looks for the lightest point in the image and makes that completely white. Then it looks, which is up here. Then it looks for the darkest point in the image and makes that actually black. And that's all that auto does, and it does that on all the channels. Don't worry about what a channel is. That makes all of this confusing. Never mind that little 14 seconds of ranch right there. What we want to do is not just look at the lightest point in the entire image. We want to look at the lightest point in the point of focus. So what this boils down to is if one-click auto doesn't work, set the white point, the black point, and the midpoint manually. Let's go ahead and do that. So lightest point in this image, maybe I want it to be right here. That looks a little bit too bright. So what I'm looking for here is basically where where basically we're losing pixels. So it's basically just a block of white space. We don't want that because it's telling us that instead of getting a full range of color, we've blocked things out. So we definitely wouldn't want something that looked like this because way too much is white. Or, so this is using the white point tool wrong. But even if we go and do something that looks like this here, like this, that's still far too extreme. What I'm looking for is something that looks more like this. Are we doing a little bit of clipping into the white? Sure. But is it strategic and looks pretty good? Yes. In fact, we can see exactly which pixels are clipping. When I say clipping, I mean pixels that are 100% white. So we're not getting any values of color there. If you hit down the Alt key, so with this white color picker picked, color picker? Is there a name for this? I don't know. It's sample an image, whatever. Picked. If you hit Alt, here, if you hold down Alt, you can actually see exactly where the pixels are 100% white. And I'm fine with it clipping it off in those various places. Now let's go to the black point and set the black point. So this would be way too much. This would definitely be way too much. But even this is a little bit too much. If I hit Alt, I can see exactly where it's clipping to be completely black. So I'm going to click in that area and hit Alt again, and click in that area and hit Alt again. I'm all right with it clipping down here. So let's look at the before and after of what we have so far. It's good, but I'm still not too happy about it because I still feel like the chroma, I still feel like the neutral gray isn't exactly right. And I'm trying to figure out what that is. Is it too blue? Is it too red? Is it too yellow? I'm not sure. And you know what? I don't need to know. All I need to do is find a point in this image that's neutral gray, click this button, and then click it there. And it fixes it for me without having to worry about exactly how it's wrong at all. So let's look at the before and after of this. Before, after. That's pretty good. Now, let's say you look at this and you say, this is almost completely perfect, only I feel it's slightly too red. I feel it's just a little bit too red. Now, the way to adjust that is to go to this drop down right here. And you can affect how red it is, how green it is, and how it is. So I'm going to go to red, and see this little point in the center right there? Of course you do. You're looking at it. If I were to drag it down just a little bit, so you move these up and down, you don't move them left and right, never do that. You move these up and down. If I move this down just a little bit, I can make it a little bit less red, or I can move it down a lot and make it a lot less red. So let me undo that. And in fact, let me go into each of these and just kind of play with it a little bit. Make it a little bit less green, a little bit more green. Go in here, make it a little bit more yellow, a little bit more blue. All right, there we go. Now, something to note about these three drop-downs, and then we'll go back to fixing other pictures and we'll make it good, and you'll be like, yay, color correcting, how much fun I'm having. I assume that's how you talk. Something you should note is if you make something more red, you're actually making it less cyan. So let me undo that. So in other words, if I drag it this way, I'm actually making it more cyan. If you make something more green, you are actually making it less purple. And if you make something less green, you are making it more purple. And as one last thing, if you make something more blue, you are actually making it less yellow. What in the world are you talking about, Jeremy, is probably what you're asking yourself right now. So let's go back to our handy-dandy color chart. File, open recent. One nifty thing about the color wheel right here is you can see this taking place. If you make something less red, it becomes more green. If you make something less purple, it becomes more yellow. Less orange, it becomes more cyan. You can see it happening right there. Or actually, let me show you an example that you can actually pull up right here. So I'm going to go into color balance. Here we go. And you can see the chart right here. In order to make it less red, you need to make it more cyan. In order to make it less green, you need to make it more purple. Now, why is this? Can't you just take out the red is probably what you're asking. But if I were to just take out the red, here's what would happen. So let me actually go into something that I haven't shown you yet. And I'll show you this a little bit better later when it's a little bit more relevant. So don't worry about how I'm doing this. But if I were to just take out the red, this is what would happen. The red, the red parts of this would just become far more blander, or they would become less saturated, or another way to phrase that is their chroma would decrease. But that's a confusing way to phrase that. So it's the difference between taking the red in an image and decreasing its chroma, and taking the red in an image here. Let me go back here. Taking a red in an image, and if I go back to color balance, and shifting its hue. This has all gotten a bit more confusing than I care to admit. So let's open up the color thing one more time. When you're shifting around color, you can shift it so the red goes from a very high chroma to a very low chroma, so it gets more saturated or less saturated, or you can put in red's place its complementary color. And if you put the complementary color, and let me actually be a little bit more specific here. If you put the complementary hue in the place of where that red is, it makes it less red. It shifts the hue to blue. I hope this is making some semblance of sense right here. Let me actually show you exactly what I mean. Let's say you had a black and white image. Here we go. It's a black and white image. Why not? If you wanted to make this image more white, you would have to make it less black. If you want to make an image less black, you need to make it more white. I think I just said that the opposite. If you want to make it more black, you need to make it less white. Color works in exactly the same way. If you want to make an image more red, you need to make it less cyan. If you want to make an image more cyan, you need to make it less red. And you can do that directly inside of the curves palette by moving this middle point up and down. So red actually controls red and cyan, green actually controls green and purple, and blue actually controls blue and yellow. If you move it up, it becomes more. If you move it down, it becomes more of the complementary color. Now, how do you remember those? There's an easy way. Red, green, blue is one of them. The phrase CMYK, it's what printers use. Cyan, magenta, yellow. They match up. Red is to cyan, green is to magenta, blue is to yellow. That might help some of you. That might help none of you. I'm happy I said it, and I'm not taking it back. So, in other words, the ways that I fix just about any image is I create a curves color adjustment layer. Let's do that right here. I hit auto. I say, oh no, that's not the auto I want. That's gross. I go to auto options, go enhance per channel contrast, and if that's good enough, I say, okay, that was good enough. If that's not good enough, so let's go to something like this. I go to curves. I hit auto. I say icky gross from the default options. I go to enhance per channel contrast. I say that is not good enough. So I set a white point, way too white, and I use Alt to make me figure out where the white point I want is. Not white enough. Not white enough. Never mind. That looks pretty good right there. I set a black point, so maybe this. That looks like, it's a little extreme, but it looks pretty good to me. And let's set a midpoint of this right here. I don't like how that looks, so where would something else be? Maybe this? Definitely not that. I'll kind of guess a little with these. And, you know, it's a little bit of playing around. There is an art to it. It's not all math. I think the microphone right here looks pretty neutral. And while this is actually pretty neutral right here, I kind of like the stylized colors that were happening. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to get this neutral right here. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to play around with it a little bit. And even though it's just 3 clicks, it's the right 3 clicks. And I tend to go a little bit too extreme, so maybe I'll increase the lights, decrease the darks, and then just bring down the opacity on that layer right there. And just in that, it went from this to this. Let me show you that again, because that was a whole lot of different steps. Don't save. Strawberry blue channel. All right, so I'm going to go here. I'm going to click on curves. If I press auto, I don't necessarily like what I get, so I'm going to switch the auto options, and I'm going to go to enhance per channel contrast. This is much better, so let me again just show you the difference. This is using it with the default auto setting. This is with the far better auto setting, and right now we have the difference between this, and that's just in using the auto. If I want to make it lighter, I do this. If I want to make it darker, I do this. So something you'll notice is when I'm just on RGB, this makes it lighter, this makes it darker. But when I'm on the individual color settings, it actually shifts the hues themselves. Don't worry about why this is happening. Just be aware that this makes it lighter and darker. So this will make it lighter. And these individual drop-downs will either make it more red to more cyan or any of the other things that I've listed in the past. So let's get rid of this right here. Don't save it and go right here. I'm going to go to here, curves, curves, auto. Auto doesn't make me all that happy, so I'm going to try the other version of auto. You'll notice there's 4 versions of auto. I really only like to play with this one, enhance per channel contrast, and sometimes I'll set the clip up a little bit more. And already that's all right, but I'm going to actually set a white point. That's way too white, so I'm going to go down here, hit Alt. Let's see what happens when I go right there. I'm going to set a dark point, so that looks pretty good right there. And I'm going to set a midpoint, what looks like a neutral gray to me. Maybe this? I don't think that did anything. I'm just going to click randomly in this image and see what happens. And we see different results happening. I'm pretty happy with this. It made it go from this to this. Now I could push this even further, and that's exactly what I've done in the past, but we're just going to make it go from that to that just in 3 clicks. Now you're probably saying to me, all right, Jeremy, I get this, I'm clicking the white, I'm clicking the black, and everything's becoming slightly better, but I still don't quite understand what's going on in the curves panel. So let's go to curves, and I'm going to try hitting auto. I'm going to go here, I'm going to go to auto options, and what I say to that is, honestly, for now, don't worry about it. You're just getting started in Photoshop. Just be aware that this is the best way to do it, and this is the panel that gives you these 3 eyedroppers right here. Now, if you finish using these 3 eyedroppers and you're not completely happy with it, so let me actually affect what I think the midpoint is. There we go. That's much better right there. If you're not happy with it, and if curves is seeming a little bit too confusing for you, and you know what? It is the most advanced tool you'll find in color correction in Photoshop. If it's seeming a